Hey listeners, it's Tim. Do you sometimes struggle with students who don't practice? This is by far the biggest and most frustrating challenge facing teachers around the world, and so I thought it's time we do something about it. On Monday, the 9th of December, we'll be hosting a special online Christmas event with the amazing Samantha Coates, who'll be helping us understand the role of parents in a successful practice routine. I saw this presentation at the APPC conference in Melbourne in July, and it was amazing, so I just had to ask if she'd be kind enough to share it with all of you, and she said yes. So it's on Monday, the 9th of December at 11 a.m. Melbourne time. If you're in the United States, that's Sunday, the 8th of December, around 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific. We've got a whole lot of bonuses and giveaways to share with you, but you need to be live to access them. Grab your free ticket right now at topmusic.co/Sam.
Hey there, I'm Rachel Ehring, and you're listening to the Top Music Piano Podcast. Get inspired as we discuss creative resources, trends in piano pedagogy, ways to grow your income and streamline your studio, and new ways to engage your students each week. If you are a teacher who wants to go beyond the method books to create an innovative studio that fosters lifelong music makers, you've come to the right place. Hi, friends. Welcome to the podcast today. I think you're really going to enjoy this interview. I actually have two guests on the show, which is different for me, but these two women work together extensively, so I thought it was important to have them both on together. They actually co-host their own podcast, and today they're giving us a look into what it's like to teach students using audiation, and particularly how audiation can be really effective when teaching preschoolers. Now, if you don't even know what audiation is, don't worry, we're going to get into all of that today. Hannah Mayo, a nationally certified teacher of music, is an independent piano teacher specializing in guiding students through a lifetime of music making at the piano. She holds a BM and MM from the University of Louisiana at Lafayette. After graduating, she continued to teach class piano as an adjunct faculty member at ULL until 2023. Hannah has been an independent piano teacher since 2006 and has directed the early childhood music and piano program at the Reach Preschool Institute since 2012. Hannah is a dedicated practitioner of Edwin Gordon's music learning theory. Krista Jadro is the owner of Music Learning Academy, an online resource center dedicated to supporting teachers using the Music Moves for Piano curriculum by Marilyn Lowe for audiation-based piano instruction. Through Music Learning Academy, Krista provides online courses, leads study groups, and presents and hosts webinars and workshops. Krista has a thriving piano studio at Brookline Music School, where she previously redesigned and directed the early childhood and group piano program. She earned degrees in music education from the University of Delaware, and both Krista and Hannah are on the piano faculty with the Gordon Institute for Music and Learning, and they co-host the Keys to Music Learning podcast. Here's my interview with Hannah and Krista. Hi, Hannah and Krista. Welcome to the show. I am so happy to be speaking with both of you today about preschool piano and audiation. I would love if each of you would introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you do.
Yeah, so thank you so much for having us. I'm Krista Jadro, and I am the owner of Music Learning Academy, and I provide online courses, study groups, webinars, and workshops with a great team of teachers to help educators deepen their understanding of audiation-based piano instruction and music moves for piano by Marilyn Lowe. I also have a studio at Brookline Music School where I've taught for 10 years now and previously directed the early childhood program and the group piano program as well. I'm on the piano faculty with the Gordon Institute for Music Learning, and I co-host the Keys to Music Learning podcast with the wonderful Hannah Mayo, where we dive into kind of all things audiation and piano instruction. And I live right outside of Boston, Massachusetts, with my husband and my two wonderful kiddos.
And I'm Hannah Mayo. I was born and raised in a small town in central Louisiana, and then I moved to Lafayette, Louisiana to study piano at the University of Louisiana at Lafayette. And it was there, we'll talk later about this, but it was there that I discovered Edwin Gordon and audiation. But after graduation, I started teaching at a preschool called the Reach Institute. I also have an independent studio of about 30 students right now. And I met Krista in 2018, and we just hit it off, and we started a podcast. Eventually, I also became faculty at the Gordon Institute, and we've been working together at Music Learning Academy, doing webinars and study groups and workshops and all kinds of great things. And I like to cook and eat.
Nice. So do I. So we should get along. So you guys live in different states, but you work together a lot. Is it mostly virtual?
It's all virtual. I wish we were closer. I often tell her to come move up to New England, but she turns me down.
Maybe if it gets hot enough here. But we get to see each other during conference season at conferences, and during professional development courses, we work together. So we do get to see each other in person sometimes.
So today we're talking about music moves for piano and audiation. Can you tell us what those are for those of us who aren't very familiar?
Yeah, absolutely. So Music Moves for Piano is a curriculum written by Marilyn Lowe that applies Edwin E. Gordon's music learning theory to piano teaching. And music learning theory, or MLT, you'll often hear, explores how individuals learn when learning music and emphasizes audiation, which is the cognitive process of understanding music when listening, performing, creating, reading, or writing. And understanding really is the key when defining audiation. And a great way to understand what audiation is to compare it to the understanding of language. So if I were to say, Doberdan, kakosi, you hear me, you're orally perceiving what I'm saying. You could read it if I wrote it down for you, but chances are, unless you speak Croatian, you didn't understand what I said, right? You could imitate it. You could echo it silently in your head, especially if I repeated it a few times, right? Can you say Dober dan, kako si? I'm sure we all could. But that still doesn't help you understand that I'm saying, good day, how are you? So if I'm comparing this to audiation and the understanding of music, if I sing, bum, 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 and I'm sure you either audiated it, you might have sung it in your head, you might have sang that last note out loud. Because you are likely audiating major tonality. As musicians, we're all pretty familiar with major tonality, duple meter. You might have been audiating that resting tone, do, when you were listening. But what else can we audiate from that tune? So how about tonal patterns? Bum, 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 so, mi, do. When I sang, bum, 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 you might have been audiating that tonic. Or maybe the bum, bum, re, fa, which is our dominant, bum, 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 bum. And then that ending, bum, bum, bum. You might have been audiating the rhythm patterns. Do, do, day, or do, day, do. And we can even go a little deeper. So we can audiate the bass line. We can audiate bum, 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 bum. And I'll sing that melody for you one more time so you can really audiate that bass line when I'm singing it. Bum, 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 ba-dum, bum, 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 bum. And now can you improvise over the bass line? So I'll sing the bass line and our listeners can improvise a little melody over it. So here we go. Bum, 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 bum. So it could have been something like bum, 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 bum. Would have been a nice little melody. What else can we do? We can change the tonality. So you have to be familiar with other tonalities in order to change it. So we can do bum, 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 bottom, bum, 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 bum. Changing it to minor tonality. We can even change the meter. And I may go back to major tonality for this one. So how about bum, 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 bum. So that would be triple. Or we can get even more exciting. bum, 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 with a little bit of an uneven meter as well. So those are all examples of audiation, but of course, just kind of scratching the surface of what students can do when they have music understanding. And I have very young students that can do everything that I just did with that tune. And this is the type of understanding that Marilyn aims to do with Music Moves for piano. So, Music Moves is a very comprehensive curriculum. Keyboard games is where all students start and can be used with children as young as 4. And we encourage teachers actually to begin that early if the student is interested. After keyboard games, students progress through books 1 through 5, which are supplemented with additional repertoire that's chosen by the teacher to match the students' individual needs, their levels. And Marilyn really has great descriptions of all of her books and all of her supplemental materials on her website, musicmovesforpiano.com. And Music Moves for Piano, it supports the development of audiation in really a number of ways. So, first, it takes a research based sound before sight approach to develop audiation and comprehension. So, just like we learn to speak before we read, students first experience music through listening, singing, chanting, moving, and improvising before formally reading and writing music. And second, the focus on patterns. Patterns form the foundation of music understanding and audiation. So, a large music pattern vocabulary, which includes both tonal and rhythm patterns, really is essential for becoming a musical thinker and a performer and an improviser. Third would be the integration of movement using Laban movement efforts of flow, weight, space, and time. Moving in these ways, particularly with flow, guides students to develop a natural sense of rhythm, phrasing, coordination. That leads to really well rounded musicians who can physically feel and express musical elements. And then finally, and perhaps most importantly, improvisation is a really just a vital part of the curriculum. Students are encouraged to be creative right from the start, first using rhythm patterns, then adding tonal patterns, and they create, they improvise, they compose their own music. It's a fantastic way to build confidence and, of course, to develop a real personal connection to the instrument. And preschoolers can do that. Preschoolers can compose with understanding. So, Music Moves isn't just about learning to play, it's about learning to think musically while building fundamental piano skills and, of course, learning repertoire as well.
Yeah, thank you, Krista. I feel like you just gave us like a whole masterclass on audiation, which was awesome because I've never really, I mean, I understood what it was, but I couldn't have articulated it, I don't think. So that was really, really helpful. I just had one little follow-up question. The keyboard games, is it a method or is it more of a supplemental thing, the one that you said you used for the little ones?
Yeah, so Keyboard Games was actually not the first book that Marilyn wrote. She started with book 1, which is what we call formal instruction. And teachers went to her and said, no, we need something to come before this, something to get them ready for formal instruction. So Keyboard Games is the first book. There's two student books, A and B, and there is a teacher's guide for students to begin their, I guess, audiation and piano journey. So we do start with keyboard games for all of the ages. If you start with keyboard games in preschool, they'll likely be in those books for about a year and a half, maybe even 2 years if they're starting, right at age 4. As students are older and beginning, so an older beginner, maybe even adult using keyboard games, they would use it for less time than the younger students.
Okay, got it. Thank you. I'm curious how each of you became interested in audiation. What was your journey to teaching this way?
Everybody has a journey to audiation, just about, which is really cool because we get to hear all these different stories. But if you want like the really long version, we do have a podcast episode. Our very first episodes kind of walk through how we came to this life and how we fell in love with Music Moves. But I'll try to give the slightly abridged version for the sake of time. I was a graduate student rummaging through piano pedagogy library at my university, and I found this collection of materials on the shelf. There was a book by Edwin Gordon called A Music Learning Theory for Newborn and Very Young Children, which I started reading and maybe understood about half of it. Is a lot of research, a lot of science talk, and I was still a relatively young teacher. But it definitely made me start thinking a little bit differently about young kids, especially. And then there were some music aptitude testing materials, which I had no idea what that was until probably, I don't know, 10 years later, when I actually learned what music aptitude was and why we test it and what we do with that information. And then I found a box of Music Moves books. There was a duet book, a Boogies and Blues book, and I think book one was in there. And then back in the days of CDs, there was a pattern CD, which had all the rhythm and tonal patterns for books 1 through 5. That's the vocabulary that Krista was talking about. So we're giving students a vocabulary of familiar rhythm and tonal patterns. And then with those patterns, they can make inferences about unfamiliar patterns, and they can use those patterns to music, to improvise, to play, to perform. The books really kind of stumped me because it didn't look like all the other method books that I had seen before. So I kind of put those down. The repertoire books were a little more approachable for me. So I used those. I used Music Moves for Two with a pair of students that I was teaching together. And this was while I was still a graduate pedagogy intern, so still really new to teaching. And I had the pattern CD for some years. And then one day, some years later, after graduate school, I was like, oh, let me just like start listening to this pattern CD and try to figure out what's going on. So I just had the pattern CD in my car, and I would just echo the patterns because I didn't really know what else to do with these patterns. Well, it turns out you do so much with these patterns, but all I was doing was just listening to them and echoing it in the car. And then skip ahead some months after that, I was reading through some literature, probably accompanying music. And I was really noticing how easy the rhythm was coming to me. And I was even hearing these rhythms in like do to day to do to day to do day do. And it was like coming out in my head the way it sounded on this CD with these rhythm patterns. And that's when I stopped and said, I think there might be something here. And so I said, I need to go revisit all of this Edwin Gordon research. I need to read some more books. I need to go see what Music Moves is all about. So I did. I started reading more. I joined a Facebook group, started asking lots of questions. I started trying out the keyboard games materials with my youngest students just as a supplement, just to see how they liked them. They liked them a lot. And then I eventually registered for a 2-week intensive professional development course that is put on by the Gordon Institute. That's where I met Krista. And then I was in after that. And that was, so started about really using the materials in about 2017, did the professional development in 2018. And then I was deep into Music Moves and music learning theory after that.
Yeah, so I became interested in audiation actually during my sophomore year at the University of Delaware from Dr. Suzanne Burton. She studied with Dr. Taggart, who had studied and worked very closely with Dr. Gordon. So we kind of call her, a granddaughter of Dr. So maybe I'm a great grandchild of Dr. Gordon. So she introduced me to music learning theory in that sophomore general music class that I took with her. And initially, I was a bit skeptical, as many teachers are. It wasn't how I learned, and I was like, I turned out fine, so I don't have to learn something different. Also, I had never chanted rhythm patterns. I've never sang in different tonalities. I never moved my body in the way that she was asking us to move our bodies. But the turning point for me actually was watching a video of maybe fourth or fifth grade jazz band. kids playing together. They were playing in tune. They were improvising solos. They were not using music. They were keeping a steady beat. And this was all without the teacher standing in front of them, conducting them. She was up saying 1, 2, 1, 2, ready, and then she walked away. And, that was not my experience in fourth or fifth grade. And that was not my idea of what fourth and fifth grade bands were supposed to sound like, right? Students couldn't do that at that age. But here was a video showing me that they actually could do that. And that basically solidified my commitment to MLT. And that was back in 2003, I think. So I've been using, the audiation approaches for 2 decades now. I've applied it in various settings. I've taught early childhood music. I've taught general music. I worked at a school for autistic students, and I brought those MLT concepts into my instruction there. And of course, with my piano instruction, using the music moves for piano materials. And when I started using it, it was relatively new. There wasn't even a keyboard games yet. It started right with book 1 when I started using the materials. I must admit, though, I made a lot of mistakes along the way. And it makes me happy that and now I'm in a position that I can help other teachers get started with a lot more understanding than I had.
Yeah. Why do you think that this system is so effective for young students?
For young students, it's important to kind of back up to what comes before audiation, which is, wait for it, preparatory audiation. Um, Preparatory audiation is the time of learning in the informal guidance here. So with these keyboard games, we're guiding informally, playfully, kid friendly. We're doing things like that, and we're not ever expecting students to quote get it right. We're just trying to guide them to move their bodies, to find their singing voice, to learn to audiate. And then later, when we go into formal instruction, we start to transition into audiation, where we will teach students what they are audiating. And we'll use labels like major, minor, tonic, dominant, subdominant, duple, triple, and so on when we are talking about what we are audiating. So preparatory audiation is really where we're focused on this preschool, kindergarten age. And so what does that look like? Children are immersed in a very rich sound environment of songs and chants, like Krista was talking about, in different tonalities and different meters, not just duple and triple, but uneven and combined. And they're moving with flow, or they're moving with pulse, or sometimes a combination of the two. They're finding their singing voice and learning to sing in tune or match pitch. They're coordinating their breath with their body movement and with their singing and chanting. So, ba 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 ba, breathing before singing or chanting. They're internalizing a sense of pulse, and they're internalizing the concept of a resting tone, or a tonal center, as many people would call it. So they're kind of like claiming their birthright to become musical in those early years. And all of this can happen in early childhood, along with simple keyboard pieces to help cultivate and contextualize the things that they're learning how to audiate at the keyboard. And they also learn technique and keyboard geography. And all of this is providing a foundation for formal instruction, so that when they finally get to first grade and they get into formal instruction, they are just ready. They know how to follow instructions. They know how to respond to you. Like if I could just come out of nowhere and I could go ba 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 ba, and my students will automatically 90% of the time echo what I just did, or they might give me a different pattern in return. Then in formal instruction, which is where we are really learning what we are audiating, which comes a little bit later, we're following a sequence modeled after the language learning sequence, which is that first we listen, and then we speak, and then we think, and then read and write. And so in these informal years, we're doing a lot of listening and speaking And we're providing students with the readiness to then later think and read and write in the years to come. But here's the real reason that preparatory audiation and audiation is all so great. Is because it's not about how teachers teach. What we do is about how students learn. And every decision that we make as audiation-based piano teachers, no matter whether we're in informal guidance or formal instruction, is about cooperating with the brain and the body and how they develop at different ages, and to create more of an ease of learning and like a true, genuine musical understanding that is age appropriate over the years of a student's life. So I see a lot less frustration in my students since adopting this approach. I see a lot more spontaneous music making. I see a lot more confidence.
Yeah, I'll just add that students learn, especially when they're young, so much, and they can absorb so much. And my keyboard game students, if they're starting at 4 years old, by the time that they enter formal instruction, as Hannah was talking about, and learning what to audiate, they can improvise in major, minor. They can sing and improvise in other tonalities, Mixolydian. My daughter was improvising in Phrygian and all of these. She just didn't have the labels for them, but she knew them. She knew how to audiate in them. Same thing with duple and triple meters. I could go back and forth, and students will just improvise ba 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 ba, and then even get more complex ba 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 ba. Now they couldn't put that on the piano yet, right? That they don't have the coordination for that. But their musical minds just can grow so much. And if we're able to do that, then when they're learning what to audiate, that will come with so much more ease. Right. And when you're comparing it to language, and I like to use this analogy too, I always go back to the language analogy. We have different senses and we can label things. So I can label a cup or my phone. I can see the paper and I can label the paper, but it's not the same in music. So that preparatory audiation phase is so important. The learning of how to audiate so that students have something to label in that formal instruction.
You guys are making this sound really attractive, I have to say. So, Hannah, I want to ask you, because I've heard teachers say, oh, I won't take a student under age 6 or 7 or whatever, because they're not comfortable with the little ones. And on your website, you say the opposite. You say you only want to take students who start with you from age 4 to 6. So that shows me that you must really, really believe in this pre-audit. What did you call it? Pre-auditory?
Preparatory.
Preparatory. Okay. So you must really believe in this. Can you tell us why it's important to you to start those kids so young?
Yes. Well, at first it was like a logistical thing. So I teach at a preschool, and I started offering piano lessons in addition to the general music classes that I give to students from ages 2 to 5. And this preschool also has a kindergarten. So we're talking pre-K and kindergarten. And those students were going through piano lessons in preschool, and then they were graduating and coming to many of them, not all, but many of them were coming to my home studio. And it was really just about space. Like, I only have so many spots. So I feel called to let the young kids take my time, and then I'll grow them until they graduate from high school. That's fine. We can go all the way to Beethoven sonatas. But I really like starting them at that age for logistical reasons. And then also because neural pathways are shedding and closing all the time at the preschool age. And so you're losing out on a very wonderful opportunity to make neural connecting happen in the brain for music. And so I want to give my students, I want to protect them. I want to protect their little musical mind, and I want to nurture it so that when they do get older, they're comfortable and they're confident and they're more natural music makers. So those are just some of the reasons. Also, I just think that preschool kids are just some of the most amazing creatures on the planet. Everything is new and wonderful. They're curious about so much. They say amazing things that make you laugh or that touch your heart or that maybe are brutally honest. And I have like this connection with preschool kids that makes me just want to teach them so much. And it's also like, from a business standpoint, it's an untapped market. But that's like at the bottom of my reasons.
Yeah, I love preschoolers too. So you're speaking my language. I like that. Krista, I'm curious, on your website, you mentioned teachers who want to dip their toe in the waters of audiation. But I'm curious, is it possible to actually dip your toe into this, or does it require a lot more research and training to really fully understand it?
If you want to, I guess, get the full benefit, right, of the research of audiation, then that would require to go all in, at least eventually, right? Because to help students reach their full potential in audiating, it's really important to understand the sequence and the process for guiding them effectively. This does typically involve deeper education. So, reading Dr. Gordon's works, which can be difficult at times, but I definitely recommend exploring the music moves for piano curriculum, attending workshops, engaging in courses or professional developments. Um, those are going to be really beneficial and really helpful to your understanding of both music learning theory and audiation, but also how to apply music learning theory to piano instruction. And we fully acknowledge, how challenging it can be, especially if you feel like you might have to unlearn and relearn some things because it's a very new approach. But we genuinely believe that it's worth that effort. But that being said, so if we're just asking, can a teacher dip their toe in and see changes? Then yes, absolutely. It's entirely possible to begin integrating in audiation into piano lessons in small and manageable ways. It doesn't have to be overwhelming or complicated to get started.
Thank you. That makes me feel a little better. I do want to ask kind of briefly here. I think a lot of teachers are intimidated by the singing and movement part of audiation. Can you address that a little bit?
I'll start by saying I was singing out of tune when I did my first professional development course, and Marilyn Lowe herself told me I was singing a Mixolydian song, and she said, "Hannah, you really have to sing in tune." And I was just like, oh, my ego took a beating that day. So yeah, I get it. The singing part is really intimidating, and the moving. I was a little more receptive to the moving because I like to dance. So if you like to dance, you might find yourself being a little more comfortable. But I never imagined the wide vocabulary of movements that were available to me. I had no idea about what kind of movement counted as, helping a kid's body audiation and their musicianship. So yeah, I totally understand that overwhelm, and it let me be the first to say it was very hard to force myself to like practice singing the songs in a way that I was really focused on the pitch and singing in tune. And then getting comfortable with the movement. Yeah, that's very different, especially if you've been sitting at a piano bench for your whole career. Getting up and moving like you're walking on the moon can be a really big shift. But it doesn't have to be huge shifts. Like, especially if you have some older students who might not want to move as much as young ones, you can do very small body movements sitting right there on the piano bench. You could maybe just move in like a gentle body circle from your core area, or you could do an infinity sign with your hand. You can incorporate movement in ways that aren't so large and scary.
And your students might be really open to movement, even if you are not moving in the same way, especially the younger students. They probably have so many ideas, even if you just play a piece and say, how do you want to move to this? They might come up with so many ideas and be really open to it.
Yeah. And sometimes with my students who are a little older and seem self-conscious, I'll have them behind me and I'll be at the piano. And so I'm like, nobody can see you. I'm not watching you. I'm just playing and you can do whatever you want back there. And I think it maybe helps. I mean, I don't know because I don't look, but I think it helps them be a little freer with feeling free to move.
Yeah, one of the best things that I ever heard Marilyn Lowe say was, children want to move. I'm like, oh, they sure do. And then, you see it in the lessons all the time. They're ready to go. Not everyone, of course, there's always exceptions. There are students who are not going to move at first, and they just need some time to process what's happening and get used to it. But if you just keep doing it and acting like this is a totally normal, legitimate aspect of musicianship, eventually they usually come around.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit specifically about those little learners, the preschoolers. Can you give us some ideas of what concepts are important to start with the preschoolers?
Yes, definitely. I have very specific goals for my littlest learners. By the time they finish keyboard games A and B, which most of my students start at 4. So they spend 4 and 5 in books A and B. And then by the time they get to first grade, we usually start book 1 either right when they start first grade or a few months in. But the goals are, I want them to find and comfortably use their singing voice. I want them to coordinate their breath before singing or chanting. And I also want them to coordinate their breath with movement and coordinate movement with singing and chanting. So a lot of coordination, a lot of moving parts. And then I want them to be able to anticipate the resting tone, like the example that Krista gave. If I did that for most of my keyboard games graduates, they would sing the resting tone at the end very intuitively. And that doesn't happen when you first start. So those are my away from the piano goals. And then my at the piano goals for this age is that I want them to be able to navigate the full range of the keyboard, not just the middle. I want them to be able to balance their arm on their center finger and use appropriate technical movements that are tension free. When playing, we want to learn how to shape the hand and make the arch and use the arm to move from the elbow. And then I want them to be able to play simple keyboard pieces in duple and triple meter with a consistent pulse, and also make changes to those pieces. So very simple changes like play it higher or play it lower, or more improvisatory changes like take these pitches and make a new song, make a new piece, or even string pieces together to create a medley or a mashup of multiple pieces. And then ideally, this doesn't always happen by the end of keyboard games, but most students can usually play an ensemble with me or another student. So that's another goal that I have by the time they graduate from keyboard games at the piano, to be able to play in ensemble.
So I'm going to ask a little bit of a selfish question here, because this is something that I've kind of struggled with. Is what technique do you guys prefer for the preschoolers? I've tried the 3-1 donut. I think the Faber maybe uses that, or using one finger. I've tried different things and I don't think I've landed on what is the best. What do you guys use?
We use the center finger approach. And actually, even before the center finger, we do the folded hand. So a soft fist. Some people call it like the bear paw or something like that. But I call it a folded hand these days, because fist was kind of like they wanted to, punch the piano when they think of fist. So the very first piece in Keyboard Games A is called the Woodpecker, and it's just learning to use the arm movement to play on the folded hand. And then there will be some other folded hand pieces kind of scattered throughout the early part of Book A. And then pretty much everything else in Keyboard Games A and B is on the center finger. There are some pieces that use the pointer finger or a combination of the center and pointer, so fingers 2 and 3. But that whole first 2 books is about learning to shape the hand, to keep the fingers together but not squeezing together, with like a little bit of space in between the fingers, and then using the arm to lift the hand to move from one place to the next or from one key to the next. So we're all about the center finger, and I actually do a lot of games away from the piano. We This is not music move specific, and I actually learned this from Irina Gorin, who she may have come up with it or she might have gotten it from somewhere else, but like tapping on pencil erasers. I know you can't see this because you're listening to a podcast, but learning to tap the fingertip and not this kind of like flat tapping. And so we do like little finger games, we call them. And I have these little like squishy stress balls, and we put our hand on top and then we use our thumb to pet its little head, so that we're keeping the thumb close to our hand but not tucked under. I don't love the 3-1 donut because it tucks the thumb and that causes tension in the thumb. So I don't really use that one, but I kind of hover. I'm on top of my students when they're playing their keyboard games pieces, and I'm just kind of like making small adjustments to their hands a lot, and just doing a lot away from the piano to learn what actual muscles and body parts are moving. And we talk a lot about, we know what something is by what it is not. This is a big MLT concept. So we'll do things wrong. We'll squeeze our fingers tightly together, or we'll stick our pinky up, and we'll talk about good apples and bad apples, because the second piece in keyboard games is the apple and the worm. So we learn to form our apple hand and use our worm finger. And it's all really cute, but they learn technique, and my students have really good technique, and they have much better technique in the last, I'd say, 7 years than they did before.
Yeah, that's helpful. That was a whole bunch of great ideas right there, packed into a couple of minutes. So then how do you transition from that into an open, relaxed, like 5-finger position?
In book 1, we start to incorporate the fingers 2 and 3, and then eventually fingers 2, 3, 4. And we play lots of pieces with fingers 2, 3, and 4. And then eventually we get to the thumb and the pinky added, and we're in 5-finger position, and we start to play pentascales and different major and minor pentascales. And there's also a lot of emphasis on separated playing, so non-legato, lots of non-legato playing at this age, so that you don't start creating tension in that connected sound. They do play things connected. They do use legato touch, but whenever we first introduce all 5 fingers, it's a lot of non-legato at first.
And then at what point do you introduce note reading? Because this sounds like years of preparatory technique and everything before you ever introduce actually reading the notes.
So that's a great question. And I think Hannah might agree. That's probably what we get asked the most is, well, when do they start reading? And in Music Moves, the introduction of music reading and writing really is carefully timed and sequenced so that students have developed a strong audiation, improvisation, and set of keyboard skills first. So students typically begin formally reading around age 11. When they begin to think abstractly, they've acquired a large music vocabulary of tonal and rhythm patterns. They're playing fluently in many keyalities in both major and minor tonality, and have had many opportunities also to apply their skills and their vocabularies to improvisation activities. And at this point, students are guided to connect what they have audiated to what they see on the page. So we're using the familiar tonal patterns, rhythm patterns, familiar songs first before the unfamiliar. However, the process of reading readiness or emergent music literacy, that does start earlier. So throughout the Music Moves book, starting with keyboard games, students are engaging in activities that lead to music reading. So learning short tunes in different tonalities and meters that they're eventually going to read, acquiring an organized and very large vocabulary of rhythm and tonal patterns, comparing music notation with audiated sounds, learning note parts, identifying note names and intervals, drawing rhythm trees, learning key signatures, we call them dose signatures, playing games with notated familiar patterns and songs. And also, when learning repertoire, the music is right there for the students to see. And while we may be learning the piece by rote, by ear, we are looking and we're making observations about the written notation. So even though we're not formally reading and writing till a later age, when they get to the page and when they're doing that, it's not unfamiliar, which is really important. Um, Marilyn spent a lot of time on Facebook answering teachers' questions and helping them navigate music moves for piano. And one of my absolute favorite responses was to a question from a parent to a music moves teacher. And the question was, why does music moves delay reading? And Marilyn's response, and I'm going to quote it, I always stress that we need to build a music vocabulary to use for improvisation and to increase ability to read notation. This means a lot of time without notation. Reading happens gradually, but there is a lot to learn, same as language. Think about all the words and conversations young children have before they're asked to read. I don't consider it delayed reading. I consider this optimal learning that provides a strong foundation for many music skills. And I've always kind of carried that answer with me, that we're not delaying reading, we're really optimizing learning for our students.
Okay, I have to play the devil's advocate here just for a minute. Do you find that when I'm going to call it delayed reading, when you put that off, that when they do start reading, that it's maybe frustrating not for them not to be able to read at the level they can play, or that their sight reading doesn't quite catch up to where their ear is?
I have not experienced frustrated students because we're really balancing what we're doing in class. And even if they're playing something that is more difficult or challenging than they can read, by that time, we are referencing the page, even if they're learning it by ear. So they might not really be reading the entire thing, but they are definitely looking at the music to help with their audiation. And they might be independently reading pieces that are not as difficult yet. But they get there and they will get there. And it's a really nice natural progression to reach that point.
Yeah, I will add that in more recent years, I've been more experimental with bridging the traditional with the audiation based piano teaching when it comes to reading. And I actually do a lot of notation readiness or emergent music literacy. Like my students can use the little note tiles and they know where all the notes are. Like they can note identify, they know what intervals are. I'm just not using up my very limited lesson time on reading which frustrates kids if it's done too soon, if it's not done in the right sequence. But I did find a really great resource called Daily Reading by Christine Donkin, and that has sort of supplemented pretty well. And I've got students who are closer to age 9 and 10 who have started kind of doing this already in a very guided kind of way. And so, like, yes, students before age 11, they can learn what all the labels are: quarter note, half note, whole note, eighth note. They can learn what all the music symbols are: treble clef, bass clef, mezzo piano, dynamics, articulations, and all of those kinds of things. So they really are kind of reading, just in a different way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, not notes on the staff yet.
Well, they can identify notes on the staff.
Okay.
For sure. Yeah. And it's kind of like teaching is messy, and every teacher has to kind of figure out like how they're going to navigate this world and also, appease their students and their parents and, their exams and whatever it is. So I used to be kind of a self-righteous, like no reading, but I've kind of like, I've softened to that, and I've seen where, no, we can do things as long as they're age appropriate, as long as we have a purpose and we're asking, like, why are we doing this? What is the purpose of this?
So to kind of wrap this up, and we've touched on this a little, but I want you to bring it home. How do you see that this has affected your older students who have been doing the audiation process for a number of years?
Oh, it's really kind of amazing. So I see students really start to blossom around fourth grade, the ones that come through, and like they can do amazing things before fourth grade, and I'm very impressed with the ones before that. But around fourth grade, you see just this coming to life of musicality in a student. I have a really quick great story. I have this student. She was playing RCM level 1 piece, and we took a video of it. She was watching the video and she goes, "Oh, look, I'm like swaying back and forth while I play." And I was like, "Yeah, you're really feeling it." And it's because she's been immersed in movement, and she's learned in a way that, doesn't feel frustrating or stressful. And so she's got like this kind of natural confidence about herself when she plays. So I think it's these little things that I see in my students that I did not see before, that really, that's what keeps me going.
Do you have anything to add, Krista?
Sure. I mean, just to kind of piggyback off of what Hannah is saying, I think the confidence is wonderful with the students, and the willingness to try new things and to improvise and to be okay with mistakes that they make at the piano, and their ability to hear mistakes at the piano. I am very seldomly correcting them if they play a wrong note or if they get a rhythm wrong. Often they stop themselves and they fix it, or they just resolve it and keep on going because they're audiating and they're understanding what they played, and maybe the mistake that they made and how they can fix it and how they can move on. And that's even happened at recitals where they don't get flustered if they make a mistake. They just kind of improvise their way out of it and keep on moving. So just all of these skills that these students have when they're so young. I mean, my oldest student right now is in 10th grade. My youngest is in 5th grade, and I couldn't do so much of what they can do when I was their age. Their ability to hear something and then to play it, and then their ability to harmonize it and maybe even change the harmonies to something that they think sounds more interesting or more fun, to play pieces not from a physical memory of this is how my fingers moved, but to play from audiation and just understanding how it sounds, and then to take that and to transpose it or to take the harmonic progression and create something entirely new over it. Those are just things that I could not do when I was their age, but I can do now from teaching them. And we just have so much fun in lessons, just doing all these musical things and musicking together. Sometimes sometimes it doesn't feel like I'm teaching them. Sometimes it just feels like we come together and we make music for an hour and a half, because some of my students come for an hour and a half, and almost every single time they say, "Wait, we're done? Can I stay?" Which is amazing. It's amazing as a teacher to have those experiences with my students.
It's a very energizing approach. Yeah,
Yeah, it sounds like it for teacher and student, right?
right.
Yeah, this has been so inspiring. I really want to thank you guys both for being here and sharing all of this. And I need you to tell listeners where they can learn more about all of this and possibly get in contact with you both. And if they're interested in starting their audiation journey, where should they go?
So if you'd like to get in contact with me, you can visit my website, which is on musiclearningacademy.com. You can reach out to me by email, which is kjadro@musiclearningacademy.com. Hannah and I would love for you to join our Facebook group. That's a great start. We have some guides there and some videos and can really point you in the direction if you would like to learn more. And there's also so many wonderfully supportive teachers in that group. And it's called Introduction to Audiation Based Piano Instruction and Music Moves for Piano. It's a very long name, but it's worth typing it all in so you can find us. And even if you're just remotely interested, we'd love to have you. And our podcast, Keys to Music Learning, that we talked about today. If you're interested in this, we highly suggest you start right with season 1 from the very first episode, and it will bring you through more in depth a lot of what we talked about today. So I think those are some great places to start. If you are a reader, I would suggest getting the book, The Ways Children Learn Music by Eric Bluestein, which brings you through music learning theory, but in a little bit of an easier way than reading Dr. Gordon's works. And also going to the Music Moves for Piano website, and that's just musicmovesforpiano.com, because Marilyn has really great descriptions of all of the books, of the supplemental books that she has, and she also has many videos of her teaching as well.
Great. Hannah, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I have also a website, mayopiano.com, and I do have a section for teachers, which probably is most of the resources that Krista just mentioned. But and then also the Music Learning Academy YouTube channel has some Q&As with different audiation-based piano teachers. And you can contact me directly through my website, through the contact form as well.
Great. And Hannah, you also mentioned to me before we started recording that you're going to be speaking at the MTNA conference coming up.
Yes, I'll have a session on preschool piano. The session is called, it's called Preschool Piano, a meaningful and engaging, I think I might have gotten that, engaging and meaningful lesson template for students ages 3 to 5. And I will tell you, I'm actually currently teaching a 2.5-year-old and a 3-year-old.
Oh, wow.
We're really stretching the bounds of preschool piano. Yeah, and so I'll be doing some demonstrations of what the singing and chanting and moving looks like, and some of the finger games that we do away from the piano, and also, of course, talking about keyboard games pieces at the piano as well.
Great. So if listeners are planning to be at MTNA, I encourage them to check that out and say hello to you.
Please find me.
Yeah. So we'll put all the links in the show notes. Thank you so much, both of you, for being here. I learned so much, and I know that listeners are really going to enjoy learning from you both.
Thank you for having us.
Yes, thank you. It's been fun.
That's the end of the show for this week. I hope you enjoyed this interview and learned as much as I did today. Next week on the podcast, Abigail Prophet is going to be joining me to review some preschool piano curriculums. So if you've ever wondered what curriculums are available for teaching the youngest learners, be sure to join me right here next week. I'm Rachel Ehring. You've been listening to the Top Music Piano Podcast, and I will speak with you again very soon.
How do you keep up to date with all the latest trends and research into music education? How do you connect with other teachers around the world and make sure your teaching stays fresh and relevant for students of all ages and stages, both now and into the future? I created our Top Music Pro membership to be the one-stop shop for music teaching resources, training, support and community, and I'd love for you to come and join us inside. With over 40 comprehensive training courses, hundreds of teaching demonstrations and lesson plans, free monthly sheet music, discounts, and all the business and pedagogy support you could ever need, Top Music Pro is the community you've been looking for. If you're ready to level up your learning from the podcast and join thousands of other teachers in our global network, head over to topmusicpro.com today.